through the non-basketball game.
We are the tribe from the north, we're brave and we're bold. Defeating our rivals never gets old. Making our way to the Big Sky Conference. Watch out, cause here comes the silver and gold. Whoa, whoa. This is Tubbs at the club for the Vandals of Idaho.
Welcome back, Tribe from the North, Brave and Bold, to the official, unofficial podcast of your Idaho Vandals and the Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brian Marceau, joined as always by former producer, current co-host, I'll get that down someday, Dallas Hammer. Dallas, no, I mean, you stretched out NFL shit as long as you can. How's it going, Spokane?
It is fantastic. For any of our listeners, I am wearing a Super Bowl champions hat with the Lombardi trophy on the front of it. It is egregiously annoying and awesome. I'm also wearing a Detroit Lions Jared Goff jersey that I promised myself I would purchase if the Rams won the Super Bowl, thanks to the Lions beating the Cardinals, the Rams getting a first-round home game, and etc. So the last day that I'm going to be wearing football stuff before I transition into, I don't know, who knows if I'll even wear clothes. Hashtag only Tubbs.
Only Tubbs. Yeah, exactly. Patreon.com/Tubbs Clubs, guys. And jumping to our other guy who, spoiler alert, we're changing order today, which means Marten Heemstra, our producer, who is usually running the show from the background, he is going to be front and center ASAP. So, Marten, how's it going in the 83843?
It is going good. It is a good Monday evening, and I'm excited to watch some basketball tonight and hopefully the rest of this week.
And the spoiler alert is, look, we're going to talk later on the show about Coach F rounding out his staff. We're going to preview the men's basketball tournament, which tips off on Tuesday or Wednesday. Marten just fact-checked me. Viewers saw that. Men's tournament tips off on Wednesday. But in, honestly, like 20 minutes or so, the University of Idaho women's basketball team tips off. This is going to be the first kind of de facto Tubbs at the Club pregame show where we're going to hit the women's last few games of the season, Big Sky Awards, but then slam into previewing because, hey, this is what we've been talking about all season. Is our women's team going to be ready when tournament comes around? And you know what? Looks like we're doing all right. So jumping right into Around the Bar, brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. I'm going to talk about the games real quick. So last week, Idaho on Monday, before we recorded, beat Portland State by, I think, 35 in Moscow. Portland State looked positively atrocious. And then Idaho travels to Portland State. It was a COVID makeup scenario. That's why we played the same team back-to-back. This game was a little bit closer. Idaho held on for a wrong page, guys. Idaho held on for a 73-68 win in Portland. By the way, side note, we need to take 10 seconds, Marten, to shit on the Portland State broadcast for not being prepped to have a feed for this game.
Yeah.
ESPN Plus is great, but it sucks if the universities do not take care of what they need to. Idaho did. Portland State did not. That's why viewers didn't get to watch. That was a Portland State issue, not an ESPN Plus issue, not an Idaho issue, a top 5 Portland State issue. But in
The one
that
thing
game,
I will quickly add to this, it might not have been a Portland State issue. It could have been some tech issue that we don't know about for sure that you probably won't ever know the answer
can I
to.
tell you? Well, actually, I heard Portland State didn't even set up a broadcast. They did not. They didn't set up broadcast. They did not set up play-by-play. They just did nothing. They did top 5 Portland State stuff. So thanks a lot, Portland State. But run through that game real quick. Idaho wins by 5, 73-68. Behind Beyonce B's 40 points and 7 rebounds, and Tiana Johnson 16.9 rebounds. Last game of the season in Flagstaff, Idaho could have potentially had a first-round bye had they held on for this game, but obvious spoiler alert, we don't have a first-round bye, so Idaho lost. NAU wins 86-69. Cindy Gandy puts up 22 points, 3 steals. Beyonce B, 13 points, 8 rebounds. Marten, before we get into other stuff that we're going to slam through before we get into our pregame, what's your takeaway from those last 2 games?
I can't really say much about the Portland State game. I could not watch it. I was literally watching the StatCast and listening to Doug Taylor's play-by-play for this game. It was a back and forth, and Idaho just could not pull the way in the Portland State game, but they did at the end, and it was nice to see because it would have been, you would not have wanted me to see me go postal if they lost to Portland State. That would have been a not fun Marten experience. But NAU was a bit of a clunker, I'd say. And it was just, they ran out of steam early. I don't know if it was maybe the elevation was an issue. I hope not, but it was, they held on. I think they were ahead by 3 in the first half. And then NAU just had a hot third quarter and just held on to win that last game. Couldn't really continue that magic.
Yeah, the thing that I saw, I'm going to focus on the Portland State game a little bit more because, look, Northern Arizona, they're solid. They're one of the 3 teams Idaho was tied with heading into last week of action, competing for that last bye spot. So NAU, not a bad team. So, losing to a top 5, not a Portland State joking top 5, like an actual top 5 team in conference. That's not what you call a bad loss. I'm going to jump to Portland State games. If you're wondering how Idaho went from winning by 34, 35 to winning by 5, in the game in Moscow, Portland State shot, I think, 29% on the game. Yeah, 29% on the game, 5.9% from 3, 1 for 17. Then in Portland, Portland State didn't shoot the doors off or anything. They shot 46.9% from the field, 23% from 3. But what you saw was probably one of the best efforts from Portland State on the season. And Portland State still lost. Marten, Portland State didn't win a single conference game, did they?
Nope. They have not won a game since 2021. And I think I want to say it was a non-D1 game, but I can't remember off the top of my head for their schedule.
And we're going to we'll end up referencing the old Portland State games a little bit when we shift into our actual pregame, but we have to jump real quick because women's all conference teams and awards were announced today. Marten, you want to take away how that impacted our Vandals?
First of all, I want to give a quick shout out to Beyonce B getting Big Sky Player of the Week for a second time this season. Quickly rolling into conference awards for Idaho. Louise Forsythe, top reserve, which I think is that. I'm assuming that's 6-man, right?
Top reserve, 6-man, same thing.
Okay. I just want to make sure
the best player who is not a regular starter.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just want to make sure I'm getting that right. And also got all honorable mention Big Sky. Beyonce B was our only other player to get in a recognition this year. First team Big Sky. Did not get Big Sky MVP this year, unfortunately, even though she was the preseason Big Sky Player of the Year. That went to Leanna Tillman, I think that's how you pronounce it. Rolling into that now. First team Big Sky Conference was Leanna Tillman, Sac State, Beyonce B, Idaho, Darian White, Montana State. All 3 of those were unanimous selections. Carmen G. Feller of Montana and Tamika Whitman of Idaho State also round out the 5 first team selections, and Seton Sobolewski was coach of the year.
And he coaches at Idaho State.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't have much takeaways other than I know you referenced Beyonce being for preseason MVP. Well, I mean, hanging on to make first team all league, that's essentially hitting expectations. Darian White of Montana State is also another person who would have been in the conversation for MVP as well. So with those, having touched on those awards, and congrats to Lise Forsyth and Beyonce, Marten, we have a game tipping off in 18 minutes for our live listeners, live viewers. It is the third time in roughly a week and a half Idaho gets to hang out with the Portland State Vikings. This time, it's of course, it's in Boise, so that is a neutral site. Although, in terms of fans, there's probably going to be more of an Idaho contingency there. Hashtag men's team, good God, quit sucking. So we have home court advantage sometime in Boise. But previewing the game we have coming up, Marten, what would you see as our keys right now for Idaho? Because look, if you're a casual observer, you just saw these last two games. Idaho kills Portland State, then it's pretty dang close in the second one in Portland. Now we're neutral site. Casual observer might think that looks like it's trending in a way that's concerning for Idaho. Also, beating a team three games in a row pretty quick can be tough. So what are you looking at as far as what Idaho needs to do to pull away with a victory?
They need to control the game from the from tip off. Idaho needs to just get Beyonce the ball and let her just take over the inside and just dominate over everybody. Show why she should have been the Big Sky MVP this year. Show and just take over and not have those. I want to say it was Doug Taylor kind of described it as the shake the boat, kind of wobbly moments where it feels like they're going to lose control, lose momentum, and it's going to just go the other team's way. They need to not have those moments.
The other thing that if you're a Vandal fan, you're watching the game, you know the Idaho team relatively well. Big name to pay attention to on the Portland State side. Leading scorer for Portland State both games against Idaho is Esmeralda Morales. The first game, look, when Portland State scored 39, everyone had an atrocious game. Morales shot 5-14 from the field, picked up 10 points, which was the best output on Portland State. Snagged 3 rebounds too. Morales in the closer game that none of us got to see, thanks Portland State. Morales put up 22 points on 9-17 from the field, 2 of 7 from threes, 3 rebounds, 8 assists. So honestly, she appears to be kind of the engine behind it. I mean, Portland State's train is going nowhere. They know they won no games in conference. If they get a first round upset, that is their conference championship. But that looks like if there's a player who's going to have a big game on the Portland State side to make this competitive, looks like Morales is the name to pay attention to, Marten.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with that.
So in addition to obviously Beyonce, she's dominating force on the inside. Who else in your mind, or who's a couple names on the Idaho team who you're looking at to either, if the term step up is a little bit too strong, we'll go with Idaho needs to have a sizable contribution to come away with the win.
The other names I'd say to keep an eye out for is Sydney Gandy. I know at some points she'll have like spurts where I think she'll hit like 3 or 4 like threes in a row, and just instead of being like a 2-point game, it's now a 14-point lead. And she'll have those moments like that, and other times it'll kind of be quiet. I think if you want to have Idaho just blow teams out of the water, I think you need to look at her having a big game. The other one is Tiana Johnson. I know she sometimes can be that presence when Beyonce is not having that inside post presence that you would like from her. And sometimes Tiana can also shoot the 3 as well. Granted, I don't know if that should be something she should be doing all the time, just off of what happened in the NAU game where she started at, I think it was like 2 for 2 and proceeded to miss the next 8 shots. It was a not big contribution there, but it was that's kind of the one thing that I'd say. Those are the two names, and also coming off the bench, Louise Forsythe, just because she is ever since transitioning to being that first person off the bench, has been that spark Idaho has had when things are just not going well for them at that moment.
Yeah, Tiana Johnson shot on the season. She shot 39% from three, which, broadly speaking, pretty good. Now she, like all three shooters, and Newly definitely lets her take some attempts. If you scan through her box scores, I mean, like against Eastern Washington, she put up 13 3 attempts. She has multiple games putting up 7 or 8. And then you reference the NAU game, which that was a rougher shooting output, but still on the season 39%. She averages just under 10 points a game. Then Louise Forsythe, talked about her off the bench. She's putting up 12.9 points per game. Now she's 29% from three, 39.5% from the field. So Louise Forsythe less likely to, make 5 threes or something like that. But I guess my question for you, Marten, is the season's been up and down for our women's team, but it's in kind of simple terms. It started out rough. That counts non-conference and in conference. It's stabilized a bit where Idaho played themselves into contention for a bye. Are you at all concerned about a first round loss to top 5 Portland State, who is the 11th seed? Top 5 is, of course, a joke. Are you at all concerned about a first round loss to Portland State for the women?
It's always something you got to consider. You always got to consider. It's March Madness. It's March. Anything can happen in the month of March. As if anybody watched the previous game, Weber State just knocked off number 10 Weber just knocked off number 7 Sacramento State. So it's possible for the lower. It's possible, and it's always a possibility that it can happen. And I hope it doesn't. I hope they don't keep their heads down and look ahead to the next game. Because granted, Portland State is not good. I know John Newley on the post-game show after the Monday game gave Portland State a lot of credit to them playing Idaho tough and not just keeping their heads down. But Idaho's just got to just look at it one game at a time if they want to win, because this team can go as far as it wants to go. They are not. I would not say they are a real. They can beat anybody in this conference.
Oh, they can. And of course, Newly, who this isn't meant as a put down.
Yeah.
I just haven't met the basketball coach that heading into a tournament game against the team you're going to play is going to say, oh yeah, Portland State has no conference wins. They're dog shit. We need to not face plant or we're fine. What I'm looking at is something you've talked about, Marten, as a trend for this team is the women have become much better throughout the season. Closing out the second half is in strong third quarter and strong fourth quarter, which is something we saw in the most recent Portland State game, the 5-point game, in that Idaho was losing at half by, I believe, 4. Competitive game, whatever. That's not like 4 is not a big deal. But then Idaho shoots 53% in the third quarter, 75% in the fourth quarter. Also, they kind of bailed on the 3-ball in the second half, but in the first half, Idaho was not shooting threes that well. In the third quarter, they weren't shooting threes that well either. So we call that a sound adjustment. This time around against Portland State, Marten, first game when Idaho won by 6,000, we shot 28 threes. Second game where it was close, we shot 14. If you're introducing casual fan to this women's team that's about to tip off, do you expect this to be perimeter oriented again, like it was in the 35-point win, or a little more post centric? If Beyond Speed scoring 40 points, it means a lot of our attacks coming from the inside. How do you expect that to look this time around?
It's hard to say. If I was the coach, I'd probably say go more inside oriented against Portland State, because that's what got you your big win. Play a little safer and not rely on the 3 so much. I know it's kind of hard to say as being John Newley, because tends to be what he wants to do, is shoot the 3. But I think it's go with the safer route of more inside.
Okay. Marten, before we shift over, We still have about 9 minutes before tip off, which is going to buy people time to hang out, learn football news, then jump over to ESPN Plus. Any points you want to touch on that we kind of flew through? Because to get here, we did talk through 3 separate sections of women's basketball in terms of closing out the season awards and then previewing this game. Any other points you want to hit on before we transition out?
Nope. Just please support this team. I know they had a rough start to the season. They had a less than stellar compared to what preseason expectations were. I'll say it was below expectations, but still come out, support this team. I think everybody needs to support them. They are probably the best team on campus right now with just how everything's played out. Just please support them is all I can say.
I have one discussion I want to go for before we shift over. And Dallas, since you're kind of being producer, do you mind throwing up the women's bracket for viewers while we start going through? Perfect. It's on. And the thing I want to ask you about, Marten, is look, Idaho did not end up with a first round bye. We're at the number 6 seed. Had we held on and won our game against NAU, let's say we went out, we'd be either number 4 or 5 seed. We'd be playing Montana in the second round on the same side of the bracket as Idaho State. As is, Idaho's got Portland State in a few minutes. If Idaho wins that, we play Southern Utah, and we did pick up at least one win against Southern Utah. I have the screen blown up, so I can't look at our schedule. Which option do you like better for Idaho? Had we gotten that bye, but we're in the other side of the bracket, playing Montana first round, and then very likely Idaho State in what would be the semifinal game, or the route we landed on, which though we don't have the bye, like Portland State has no wins. This is as close to a bye as you can get without having one. And then we get Southern Utah as our theoretical match. If we get past Portland State, Southern Utah, so we have to beat to get into the semis on our bracket. Which side do you like better for Idaho, where we're at, or had we gotten that bye and we're in the top half?
I'd say I feel more confident with the side we are in now. I know Idaho split with Montana and lost by, I think it was 6 to Idaho State at home and lost by 40 in Pocatello. I feel more comfortable going the route they are now, having the momentum into a potential Battle of the Domes, Big Sky Championship game. But that's what I am most feeling comfortable with.
So you like being able to, in theory, dodge Idaho State until the final, which yes. Idaho State, they're the presumptive favorite. And I mean, they're the 1 seed. The 1 seed's typically the favorite, but like, Idaho State is good at women's basketball. Mm-hmm. So you like the side we're on. Let's say Idaho holds on against Portland State. Do a 10-second preview of Southern Utah. What's the matchup of Idaho against Southern Utah in a second round game look like to you?
That one, I'm gonna be honest, that one's a little more tougher for me to kind of predict right now. Just on, we won, but I can't remember the exact score. They lost by 22 at Southern Utah in the beginning of December when they were in that like really deep funk, and then beat them by 19 the second time around. It's kind of, I'd feel more comfortable against them just because second time around they can figure stuff out. But it's hard for me to say against this team right now.
Yeah, Idaho closed the season winning 5 of their last 6. But in terms of tournament matchups, and I'm going to talk about second half of the season, Marten, just because it matches up a little bit closer to how we understand the women's team right now. Second half of the season, I am pointing to the Southern Utah game as the transition point for us to look at. This Idaho team lost to Montana State in Moscow. Montana State would be who Idaho would very likely play if Idaho is able to hold on against Southern Utah. That 35-point loss at Idaho State, that's a second half of the season game. So, avoiding that till the final is a very good call, or beneficial for Idaho. And as far as other matchups, I mean, that's really it, because I just don't really think – I don't think anyone's that concerned about anyone other than Idaho State coming out of the top half of the bracket. So I'm going to say I don't mind where we finished out at. Look, I mean, this is like in the men's side for the last few seasons, whoever played Idaho in the first round, they essentially had a bye and they got to be in the bottom half of the bracket. If you're University of Montana against the men last year, you probably prefer that versus being in the 1 seed and having to play Southern Utah pretty quick. But I'm going to say this is a good time to jump out. Listeners, you got 3.5 minutes or so till tip off. Marten's going to be jumping off pretty quick as well. Dallas, you ready to jump in? And we're going to shift back to football for a minute because there's some real football news.
Yeah, it's actually kind of exciting. Exciting. God, I got to be better at that. Yeah, I mean, first transition here, very small update for everybody. Tucker Rovig, the former Montana State quarterback, has joined Idaho football as an offensive GA for quarterbacks and wide receivers. Technically, it's not impossible. He could technically play for Idaho next year. He has eligibility remaining. And for anybody that was too terribly concerned with either North Dakota State or Southern Carolina, Zeb Noland actually transferred out of NDSU, went to South Carolina as a grad assistant, and then ended up playing for them in multiple games last year. So there's still a chance that Tucker Rovig has come back to the state of Idaho to play, but realistically, we're just going to see him helping out quarterbacks and receivers.
Yeah, there's not a ton to add because no one in the world is going to freak out about who graduate assistants are, and we're going to join everyone else in the world not flipping out about it. But hey, cool to have Tucker Rovig over. He's a Big Sky guy. Was at Montana State through Jeff Choate's time, and then last year with Brent Vegan. I don't think your graduate assistant is really moving the needle on how your coaching staff is overall. But hey, Tucker Rovig's an Idaho guy. I believe he played at Meridian in high school. So you know what? Glad to have him. And yes, Dallas brought up Zeb Noland playing. Zeb Noland was terrible at North Dakota State and then terrible at South Carolina. So
hey, they beat an FCS school that had lost 18 of its last 20 games. It wasn't Idaho, but it was a team that was once Idaho bad. So he did get a win at South Carolina.
I will say an interesting thing about Tucker Rovig's background is he has kind of his time at Montana State's a little bit up and down. And I don't mean that in like an interpersonal sense. I think actually in a way that it could be really helpful for a guy who wants to become a coach elsewhere, in that Tucker Rovig in 2018 is the presumptive starter, gets hurt, and doesn't play the rest of the season. 2019 loses his starting job to Casey Bauman. Bauman, who was first recruited at a D1 school by Paul Petrino at Idaho, so that lets you know how good he probably was. Bauman loses his job almost immediately, and then Tucker Rovig comes in, and he's solid. I hate to use the term game manager because when people use that, they just mean he's not that great. Montana State under Jeff Choate was not a team that passed it a ton, but hey, he lost starting job, earned his starting job back, and then Montana State doesn't play in 2020 or the spring. Then 2021, Matt McKay takes over Tucker Rovig's job. He stays with the team and doesn't really take many snaps until the championship game when touchdown Tommy Malott. He was the new Montana State starting quarterback. He's injured, and then Tucker Rovig plays in the championship game. Montana State loses to North Dakota State, but hey, lots of teams lose to North Dakota State. I just bring that up as he's a guy who definitely had up and down career, as in terms of from his perspective, he had expectations of starting, then injured, then starting. Then he expects he's going to start, then lose his job. Then he starts again, then loses his job to recruitment, but he stuck around. There's probably, if you're a guy who thinks sports are supposed to have life lessons about dealing with adversity, that's a guy who definitely stuck it out. And, kudos to him. I have nothing else to add about grad assistants.
Same. Just shout out Patty Frerks mentioning he was a great teammate throughout the McKay and Malott situation. He got his job taken by a linebacker at one point. Like, the guy seems like a great dude. So happy to have him around. But again, he's a GA. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about him.
Correct.
All right. That takes us on to our next staff news. This is a slightly more important, no offense to Tucker Rovig. We have now hired our final football coach, outside linebackers coach. Brian, do you want to tell the people who he is?
Yeah, absolutely. New head coach, new outside linebacker coach, who is not our head coach. Outside linebacker coach Capona Asuega is joining Jason Eck's staff. Initially, this was a little bit of a surprise, honestly, just because we thought we had linebackers taken care of. Orich is inside linebackers. But you know what? Idaho needs to improve on the defensive end. And I do not mind that this year's staff looks like we have a couple extra coaches on hand. And Asuega has, kind of like Eck has had through a handful of his guys he's added to staff. Like Asuega is earlier in his coaching career. He has a background that, honestly, again, a lot of ex guys, they've come from they have a background that I like, in that it isn't all direct stepping up from, I don't know, like a positional coach to a coordinator at the same level. You know, Asuega most recently was he was an assistant coach at New Mexico Highlands, which is a D2 school. He was assistant head coach, defensive line coach, and community outreach director. Also was a graduate assistant at Liberty. So that helps explain a little bit of kind of a atypical background as far as recruitment. He also spent 3 years as a defensive line coach at Golden West College, which is junior college in California. So we just referenced a guy whose his footprint's kind of all over the nation in terms of the type of recruits he might pull. But, you know, Dallas, he also came highly recommended from a former Vandal.
Yeah, Mike Iupati is actually the guy who recommended Capono Asuega as our new outside linebackers coach. Eck said in the quote about the press release, he spent some time at a junior college, so that's good, making us helping us make some inroads there. Brings D1 experience from his time at Liberty. I like the guys that have done the dirty work that you have to do at D2. He's a relentless recruiter, and finally was highly recommended by Mike Iupati. So being recommended by one of the greatest Vandals of all time, and probably the best Vandal in the last 20, 30, 40 years, you can't hope for more than that. Additionally, he was just a GA. Again, we don't spend a whole lot of time talking about GAs, but when he was a GA at Liberty, they did have a guy, Jesse Lemonier, who is one of the FBS leaders in sacks that year, signed a UDFA deal with the Chargers, and then ended up starting 2 games for the Lions last year, had a sack and a half with them. So has familiarity with guys that went on and played in the big leagues. So couldn't be more thrilled about bringing this guy in.
Yeah. And one of the things that I like about X staff that is just different than the previous staffs is, again, younger-ish. And I really do not mind that we have an extra coach on the defensive side. We joked about it last week with Rob Orich. And in our Discord chat, #OnlyTubs, honestly, a lot of our talk in that group isn't about quarterbacks, and it's not about some of the sexier positions. It's questions like, okay, how in God's name can we not have the worst pass defense in the league? How can we shore up defensive line linebacking core that just had a lot of talent graduate or declare for the draft? And look, just one positional coach obviously doesn't fix that, but having another guy where you can look at his recruitment background in terms of where he's coached at, and it's a little bit different than a couple other guys on staff. And honestly, a lot of guys have kind of different footprints in terms of covering a lot of the West Coast, a little bit of the Midwest, and, you know, some of the southern, Southwest United States. Asuega has background at Liberty. That's East Coast. So not bad to have someone over there. And it just feels every step of the way, it just feels like a new Idaho football is moving in a direction we should be excited about. We're kind of closing in on not having much other football stuff to talk about, because now this brings X staff to 10 guys. And our next kind of big moment is spring game, April 30th. So I guess, Dallas, before we shift over to men's basketball, how you feeling? Or what are you paying attention to football-wise? Because, look, we're still going to be mining for football stories because that's what people care about the most. You hear this news that the coaching staff is rounded out. What else are you looking for? Or what else is going to get your bat signal up between now and April 30th?
I mean, I'm assuming we're going to continue to see some recruits file in and out here, especially as they start trying to build their recruiting class for 2023. If anybody is listening and is not a member of our Patreon page, again, patreon.com/Tubs at the Club, Marten is fantastic at keeping up with recruits. And that's honestly where I hear everything about the future Vandals. Marten has this innate ability to go find a recruit the second he tags Idaho football in it. it's internet wizardry. That's what I'm looking forward to, seeing the kind of where these new coaches are going to be reaching out and bringing in new recruits from. See what changes in the recruiting landscape between the Petrino era, which again put up a bunch of top classes, but maybe the results on the field didn't quite show it. Be very interested to see what this new iteration of Vandal football is going to be doing out there.
Can we pause really quick and just acknowledge you and I? Look, Marten's not here, so I absolutely value Marten's work on recruitment stuff. He does it way better than I ever could.
Mm-hmm.
Can we all just accept that the recruitment ratings mean very close to nothing because it's strictly based off whether people know you exist? Now, broadly speaking, like the number 1 recruit probably doesn't suck, and the number 6,000 recruit is probably not making the NFL. But in terms of like recruiting class ranking, look, again, Idaho knows this for a fact that clearly those things do not matter. But what I think does matter is the last football thing I want to touch on. Look, everyone talks about the transfer portal, which, hey, matters. It exists. It's here. Live with it. We all know about recruiting 4-year guys. I mean, Eck had talked about both of those recruitment routes as places he's going to be mining. But he's got minimum 3 guys with junior college background. Thomas Ford has spent some time at a JC. Stanley Franks spent some time as a defensive coordinator as a JC. And now we've got Oswego, another JC guys. So I guess the thing I'm paying attention to in terms of closing out the roster for this next season, I think people might be underselling JC recruits we'd be paying attention to.
See, I took that a completely different way. I took that as, oh, look, this coaching staff got here based on their hard work instead of their last names.
There is that option too. But I just bring it up because there's essentially 2 routes people tend to talk about now, and there is a third. But now that we've exhausted the football news we have, which is 2 new dudes, we're going to be mining for new stuff in the future. But at this point, we're definitely going to be mining for football news, because until April 30th, there's not going to be a ton of updates for us to do unless we can get someone who's actually watching practices, like a coach, on to talk about how practices are going. It's Veggie's time, Dallas, which means before we purge, and there's not that many listeners in this moment to purge, which we're not going to read that low number because it's gigantic. It's not low. Before we shift over to talk about the men's basketball team, aka Veggies, aka that thing Rack of Tits will not shut up about, but we love you. This has been Around the Bars, brought to you by Hughes River Expedition. If you are looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Venture into the largest protected wilderness in the continental U.S., located right here in the great state of Idaho. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. You can even check out special trips like the one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, take in the history along the river, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. You just bring your clothes, let HRE handle the rest. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal-owned and operated since 1976, ready to take you on a vacation of a lifetime. What are you waiting for? Find out what it's like to grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 800-262-1882 or check them out at hughesriver.com. And if you're a listener, you may not know what I was talking about on our live show. We have listeners who contribute messages that we'll sometimes read throughout the day. And Rack of Tit 69 has been going on and on accusing us of filibustering the veggie section, which is only kind of true. But hey, basketball update, aka Eat Your Vegetables, is here. So Idaho has we have 2 games heading into our tournament, which we'll slam through a little bit on the quicker side, then talk about our tournament game. First, Idaho against top 5 Portland State in Moscow. Idaho goes down 79-68. Idaho shoots 39.7% from the field, while Portland State shoots 48.4% from the field, which is right around that 50% mark that we have talked about so many damn times of, look, Idaho surrenders 50% shooting and whatever. That's it. As far as leading Idaho in this game, Idaho was paced by Trayvonte Anderson with 24 points, who on 6 of 16 from the field, and Trayvonte also picked up 10 rebounds, but had 8 turnovers as well. So hey, that is not fantastic. To close out the season, senior night in Moscow, Idaho holds on to beat NAU 78-69 in a game that no one deserved to finish with 69 points because that was not what I'd call a nice game. Idaho is led by Mikey Dixon, scores 27 points on 9 of 14 shooting. Trevante Anderson, another big game. Shot only 3 and 9 for the field, but still put up 16 points because he shot 10 of 12 from the foul line. Rashad Smith chips in 10. Dallas, you've been filibustered. What some takeaways you have from those last two outings we got before our conference tournament, which we will be talking about pretty quick.
So the first takeaway is the Portland State game was like the microcosm of Idaho basketball, all within those 40 minutes. Idaho at one point had 10 turnovers and 5 points in the first 7 minutes of that game, and it looked like, holy shit, here we go, coming fresh off of getting absolutely shellacked by Sac State.
Can I jump in for 1 second?
Yes, go for it.
We had turnovers on our first 6 possessions. I was live tweeting that game, and I sent out a message, Idaho, only 3 turnovers in our first 3 possessions. And I kept having to resend the message. Seriously, Idaho didn't even get a shot up until almost 4 minutes of game time had elapsed. Interruption.
It was atrocious. It was honestly, it was the worst 7 minutes of basketball I think I've ever seen. And I'm pretty sure I said that 4 different times last year. So it just finding new lows here. And then Idaho ends up leading at halftime because they shot 5 from 7 for 3. And then you look at the second half box score and they went 0 for 8 from behind the arc in the second. So it's Idaho basketball in a nutshell. They can shoot themselves out of danger, and then if the shots aren't falling, everything falls apart. So that was pretty typical. Ended up being an 11-point loss there. The NAU game I went to, it was the first time I've gone and seen a game in the new arena. I have to say ICCU Arena absolutely lived up to all of the hype. The place was pumping. It was probably, again, you see the attendance, it was listed at 1442. Probably a whole bunch of room to grow from that number, but it was actually loud. It was actually like an entertaining, fun atmosphere to be in, even if the basketball itself wasn't great. But shout out to Mikey Dixon, making your senior year count, going 27 points, 9 for 14 from the field, 3 of 6 from 3, perfect from the free throw line. Perfect way to end your career in front of the home fans. Obviously not gonna be in the front of the home fans again. Pretty good way to go out if you're Mikey Dixon, and just the 1 year stop off.
Portland State, my main takeaway is that game. It was an 11-point game. Idaho lost by 79-68. That was one of the weirdest 11-point games because in the first half, I honestly don't know if I've ever seen worse basketball. Then Idaho stabilized to keep it competitive in spite of all those turnovers because we did shoot. We shot real well, which that's been a theme we've talked about with Idaho basketball this season. Is for Idaho to win games, they just have to shoot real well, or they're not going to win their games. But again, like you said, the second half for Idaho, the bottom just fell out. First half, we shoot 50% from the field, 71% from 3. Second half, we're 30% from the field, 0% from 3. And the final 5 minutes is honestly a perfect bookend to how the game started. It was around a 3-point game, and then Idaho just face planted away. And honestly, they shouldn't have been competitive that game at all. Idaho made 23 field goal attempts. We had 22 turnovers. So last season's dreaded turnovers to field goals made ratio was very close to making another appearance. We'll say NAU game, couple trends to just look at. Mikey Dixon had one of his better games. He's actually been on a cold streak relative to how he started off conference season for quite some time. So it was nice to see Mikey Dixon start to make some of those tough driving shots that he'd been missing for a while. But also against NAU, he made more shots where his field goals were assisted than he'd done for a while. A lot of Mikey's scores he creates, which part of that's because he's a good penetrator. He can make tough shots. But honestly, I think for a better situation for how Idaho has evolved is Mikey having some shots where it's catch and shoot situation a little bit more. Because Trevante Anderson, who shot poorly, he's honestly been the offensive engine for Idaho for a lot of the second half of the season, especially our last 5 or 6 games, which is not awful news because Trevante is back for next season. We're going to jump to previewing the Sacramento State game. Big Sky men's all conference awards have not been announced, but there should honestly not be a first team guy on Idaho, even though we won 6 conference games, which feels like 1,000 compared to last year. Idaho just certainly shouldn't be there. Also, look, Patrick brought this up. We just missed it. Philip Pepple Jr. had a couple consistent solid games. He's scoring the way he needs to, which is opportunistically in terms of putbacks, but he's also getting some oops and some close shots off of rolls. Philip Pepple's never going to be like a primary force on offense, but he's looked a lot better in that regard last couple of games, but also he's played a little bit better man-on-man defense than he had early in the season, where initially I didn't know if anyone could surrender position closer to the hoop than Philip Pepple. He hasn't been like that the last couple of games, which as a final positive trend, kind of positive, because like we went 1-1 in our last 2 games, and it's not like we played world beaters. Portland State is dead middle of the conference, and NAU sucks. We finally had 2 consecutive games with defensive rating below 100 against Division I teams. So that's great. And I lied. Last thing, Dallas, I'm going to throw this to you. Shift to the NAU game. Because look, we're glad we got the win. You're right. ICCU is a great arena to watch games in. We messaged each other during that game. I found watching NAU Idaho just unbelievably frustrating both times this season, because NAU is terrible. They're the opposite terrible of Idaho. They just can't score. Defensively, they're okay, but offensively, they have no. Jalen Cone is like one of their shot creators, but he shot 38% on the season. He honestly wouldn't even start at a place like Weber State, and he was one of the top 3 scorers in the league because he gets to shoot it essentially whenever he wants. NAU missed a ton of wide open threes in Moscow, so I know I teased a kind of good defensive effort. I don't think that was a good defensive effort against NAU. I think they just missed shots, but I found the game rough to watch because it was just a mirror image of Idaho. If Idaho can score, we can be fun for long stretches, which we've talked about that, and I appreciate that.
Yep.
But NAU is frustrating because it brought it to me back to where we are. That NAU game, both NAU games were competitive, wire to wire, because just neither team's good.
I mean, that's exactly it. For anybody that sees the box score I've got up, Jalen Cone, their leading scorer, shot 23 times out of 65 shots. He took 23 of them, and it wasn't like he was on fire. He was just the one guy running around trying to find some sort of opening to throw up a terrible basket. It was ugly. Their starters, Keith Heyman 5 for 15, Carson Tout, who fouled out, and I yelled "get out of here" because I thought it was really stupid. 2 for 7. Nick Maines 2 for 11. Like they were bad offensively. They are like Idaho defensively. It does not look like they have any idea what they're doing. They're just kind of standing around hoping to God the ball's going to go in the hoop, and it shockingly doesn't very often. It's awful basketball, and while I was kind of disappointed in how poor the game was, there was a very brief moment of thinking, hey, look, Idaho might play this team again in the tournament, and Idaho might be able to win a game because this team is not very good. And then sure enough, Sac State had to ruin the party by upsetting Montana, and here we are. But there was that brief glimmer of hope I had of, hey, Idaho might actually win a tournament game. And I did not expect to ever say that going into this year. But here we are. We're not playing NAU.
Yeah, Idaho is going to play Sacramento State on Wednesday. Idaho finished number 9 in conference. We're in the 8-9 game. Dallas, can you put up the graphic real quick just so we get that correctly?
Trying to. The other browser just crashed. Give me a second.
That's cool. I'll just keep talking. Idaho, we play Sacramento State. It doesn't really matter about 8-9 because we're playing the same team as the neutral floor. The technical home team is irrelevant. And the winner of this game will play number 1 Montana State. So we're on the top half of the bracket. If Idaho is able to win, we're going to have realistically one of the toughest matchups we could have for our second game, which whatever. Look, you finish in the bottom third of the conference. There are no easy routes to a conference tournament if you are finishing bottom 4 in a conference. Sacramento State is a much rougher matchup for Idaho than Northern Arizona. And you can honestly see that in just how Idaho played Sacramento State in our 2 games this season. Earlier in the season in Moscow, Idaho held on for, this was January 22nd. Idaho held on for a 73-72 win in overtime in Moscow. More recently, and I bring this up because Sacramento State, they have a setup this season like Idaho had in Zach Klaus's first season, in that for Brian Katz was the Sacramento State head coach heading into the start of the season. It would have been his 14th season at Sacramento State. Out of nowhere midsummer, due to health concerns, Brian Katz had to retire, and Brandon Laird was named interim head coach. Sacramento State did not have a particularly great season, which is, like, I don't mean this as a put down. No one expects Sacramento State to be a powerhouse in basketball. Just look at the facility they have that 9 people fit into. But Sacramento State, look, they tied with us on the season, finishing 6-14 in league play. But Sacramento State really picked it up for them towards the end of the season. I mean, they closed out, they closed the regular season with a win on the road in Montana, in addition to beating us by 32 is how much Sacramento State beat us by in the second showing. And regardless of which showing you're going to look at for Sacramento State against Idaho, one of the things you're going to have to pay attention to in this game is, does Idaho have any prayer of slowing down Bryce Fowler, which we absolutely could not do this season? In our most recent game, when Idaho lost by 32, Fowler scored 23 points on 9 of 15 shooting. In the first game Idaho played against Sacramento State, Fowler absolutely dominated the second half of that game. Fowler was absolutely the reason why that game in Moscow went into overtime. Scored 22 points on 10 of 17 shooting that game as well. He has kind of a weird game in that he's a wing, but he posts up guards and scores quite well. Has a very, very good touch around the basket. I got to say, Dallas, this because a big question for Idaho is, one, can we shoot it over 50%? And 2, can we at least make Bryce Fowler not look like an MVP of the league? He's going to be a first-team all-league guy.
I mean, that's exactly what it's going to come down to. Is realistically, I view this as Bryce Fowler versus Mikey. Which one of these guys is going to take over the game? And that the guy who ends up taking over the most is the team that's going to win, because it's one guy carrying a team that's flawed, I think is the best way to say it. I got to be honest, I don't feel great about Idaho's chances here. Sac State played really well to end the season. At one point, they were the worst team in conference. Beat Idaho State by 5 shortly before, creaming Idaho 83-51. Then beat Eastern 81-75. Went on the road and lost to Montana State by 6, and then beat Montana. So really good showings in their last 5 games. They did lose previously. Before that, they were on like a 5-6 game losing streak. So not great from Sac State this season, but again, they finished above Idaho in the standings because of this run that they just went on to end the year. In my head, you take the hot team, you take the team with the best player. As much as I love Mikey Dixon, I think Bryce Fowler is the best player in this game. I just don't see Idaho being able to stop Fowler. I feel like Sacramento State kind of figured out in that second game what they needed to do to get their offense going against what you would call defense from the Vandals. And I don't, maybe it's just the punch in the mouth of, we were riding a win streak and feeling good and lose by 32 to what was the worst team in the conference. I just don't see it. I don't feel good about this. I feel like Fowler's going to have a monster game.
The other 2 names you need to pay attention to on Sacramento State, Zach Chappelle, who scored about 30 in the first game in Moscow. He averages 11.7 in the conference season. William Fitzpatrick averages 11.2 in the conference season. Zach Chappelle is a solid 3 shooter at 38% in the conference season. William Fitzpatrick is a very solid 3 shooter at 43% in the conference season. And the question I'm going to look at from the Idaho end is, first, can we turn into a track meet? Because Sacramento State they like to slow it down. Idaho is a little bit better. First time we played Sac State, having a faster pace. Wasn't really the case the second time. But the follow-up question on the defensive end that Dallas, you alluded to, one of the things Sacramento State did against Idaho, particularly in the second half of that game, is Sacramento State posted up the Idaho guards a ton. Idaho didn't really rotate defensively. And like Bryce Fowler just got an army of 5-footers. And Fowler was not the only guy who did that too. But that was one of the very clear tactics that Sacramento State coach Brandon Laird used against Idaho and Sacramento, was to put Fowler's about 6'5". So for a big sky wing, he's tall-ish. When he gets matched up on a guy like Trevante Anderson or a guy like Mikey Dixon, if he's going to post up, we absolutely need to send help. Idaho did not send help against Fowler in either game, either in Moscow or Sacramento State, which I'm going to guess Coach Brandon Laird absolutely loves. That kind of matches the defensive strategy Idaho's had the entire season of, we don't look like we have a team defensive concept. So I don't know how we're going to stop Fowler from getting points inside. And that's what opens up looks for Chappelle and Fitzpatrick, is wing posts up. It's not centers posting up for Sacramento State. They don't have talent like that. It's Fowler getting penetration or posting up. And if he's doubled, he kicks out. If he's not doubled, he is just going to shoot until the buzzer says the game's over, and he converts at a pretty high percentage inside.
I mean, we've talked about Philip Pepple Jr. looking pretty good recently. He's going to have 18 help side blocks to feel better about this game. I just don't see it. Like you said, posting up the guards and getting all those shots from in close. Sac State had 32 points in the paint in the first game, where Idaho snuck out the win in overtime. 42 points in the paint in the disgusting blowout. They're gonna get to the hoop, and they're gonna score unless Christensen and Pepple Jr. end up having the games of their lives defensively, as just coming in and helping and picking up a ton of not worthless blocks, but help side blocks, just getting off of your guy and swatting the guard as he's going up for his layup. That's the best hope and prayer this team has. I think I just don't see it. This is an awful stylistic matchup for Idaho. Felt much better if Sac State had lost to Montana. Idaho would have played NAU as the 8th seed in the 8-9 game instead the 9th seed in the 8-9 game against Sac State. Just a terrible matchup here. I just don't see how we have a chance in this. Mikey has to score 50. I just don't feel it.
I want to push back on that. I don't think Mikey needs to score 50, because when a lot of Mikey's games, when he scored a ton, look, he scored a ton against Weber State, and that absolutely was part of why we held on. But when Idaho's had some of their better games, it's not Mikey as the guy who's scoring, who's exclusively scoring. We're getting contributions from Rashad Smith, who he doesn't create as many of his own scoring looks. He's a second. He scores off of shots created by driving kicks from guys like Trevante. And this is the individual player that I'm paying most attention to. Trevante Anderson in the 32-point loss to Sacramento State. Anderson scored 4 points on 1 of 3 shooting with 6 turnovers. In the game Idaho held on for the overtime win, Trevante led us in scoring 17 points, 6 and 9 from the field, 3 assists, 4 rebounds. I think what Idaho has to do, look, if we're going to push the pace, we have to have Trevante creating havoc through penetration. He's got to be drawing fouls. He's got to be finishing, which is a big deal for Trevante. If he can get that extra half step to turn his shoulder, he's a solid finisher. But if he doesn't get that extra half step, that's when he has his lower percentage outings, or when he starts shooting jumpers and he just needs to not be a jump shooter other than catch and shoot wide opens. The last offensive key, Tanner Christensen was better through much the second half of the season. What happened, the big development for him, is he became much more effective at getting very deep position. So if Idaho's going to be able to win this, we just have to be able to blitz them offensively, which means Tanner has got to be effective getting position inside. Trevante is going to have to create offense for himself through penetration and for others through driving kicks. And then we're going to have to make jump shots. That includes Rashad Smith shooting well. Look at, and in most of our wins, Rashad Smith shot a very, very high percentage, like around 80% in the Montana and Eastern Washington wins. But look, Mikey Dixon's going to have to make catch and shoot shots. Yusuf Saleh. If Yusuf Saleh is not making jump shots, he doesn't really justify his time on the court. Idaho's got to make threes. We have to create havoc through driving kicks, and we have to hit threes, or that is the way Idaho can be competitive this game.
I mean, we kind of alluded to it with the NAU talk. I know that was kind of a sloppy game, but Trevante having 7 assists there and a lot of Mikey's scoring coming off of assists. That's what we need. That's where I was saying score 50. No, I don't want to see 50 points of ISO ball with Mikey. I would like to see Trevante get 10 assists, kicking out to 10 threes to Dixon. It was an okay game plan against NAU. NAU is obviously not phenomenal. Sac State, I think, is going to be much more prepared to probably beat the shit out of Idaho. But that's what we need to see. I mean, you hit it on the head. Trevante has to create. Again, I just by default think Mikey's got to lead the team in scoring, and he's got to do it by a lot. But it's certainly we have to see Trevante getting those assists. I would love to see Yusuf Saleh hit more shots. He seemed to do better at that when he came off of the bench in previous games. Now, Jameel King did start for senior night. I don't know if he's going to start again. He played 28 minutes. He hasn't played a ton this season and typically is not a starter. We could see that again, maybe start him, play Saleh off the bench like he was doing fairly well in as a reserve to start the year, and then kind of got cold when he became a starter. But it'll be interesting to see. As the one thing you mentioned, they're going to have to hit threes. We could see more of Gabe Quinnett. He hasn't played a whole lot the second half of the season, but if they're at a point where they need a guy to shoot threes, I mean, Gabe is the guy that he comes in and shoots threes. That's realistically what he's there to do. So you could see a little bit more of that. But again, it comes down to the same thing it's come down to all season. If Idaho is on fire, hitting all their shots, they've got a chance. If they shoot under 40%, probably not going to be very close.
You mean under 40% from 3, right?
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. The reason why I want to specify that is Dallas. We have these impromptu games talking about Idaho basketball. How many wins, D1 wins, does Idaho have with an offensive rating below 100? We've got 7 D1 wins on the season. How many of those came with an offensive rating below 100?
I want to say 0. I don't think I'm right about that. I'm guessing it's going to be 1, and you're going to smack me in the head for one that I completely missed, but I'm going to say 0.
Yeah, you missed one. Sacramento State in Moscow. We had a 97.3 offensive rating that game. Otherwise, our next worst offensive rating in a win was 108 against Northern Arizona. And I bring that up because shifting back, some listeners might have been like, well, Brian, yeah, if everyone makes all their shots, they should win, right? No, like that's the point. Idaho has to play exceptionally well on the offensive end to have any prayer of winning games. We have one exception. It was at home, and we barely won against Sac State. So if you want to bring up like, well, hey, this is that same Sacramento State team. Sure, this is a Sacramento State team that there's reason to explain why they came together in the second half and looked a bit different than they did in the first half. And I got to say, I think Sacramento State we're playing is much closer as a matchup to the guys we saw at the end of the season than what we did earlier in the season, in that if I'm Montana State, I am definitely rooting for Idaho to win this game, because if I'm Montana State, Sacramento State can reasonably be competitive in the second round. Idaho's not going to. So if Idaho's going to have a chance, we're going to have to shoot real well, which brings me to an asterisk. I don't know if Idaho could have a worse tip-off time. And look, I could be wrong, because I know teams don't always practice when their games are, because obviously it just wouldn't work to always have practice during school late, 7 o'clock, 7:30 at night. Idaho tips off at 9:30 Mountain Time, which if you're a Moscow dude, that's an 8:30 game time. The guys are going to be there, obviously, for that 1 hour to not be a huge deal. But if you're a team that needs to win by hitting shots, honestly, I would hope, if I'm the coach, that the game feels like a more normal game. This is going to be atypical. This is more the tip-off I would want if I'm Sacramento State. And a key to our team winning is the other team just, look, if we can keep the score low, our team's probably doing fine. That's what Sacramento State wants. I'd want the early tip-off if I'm them. If I'm Idaho, man, I actually think that time could be a problem, because, look, the intensity that early in the morning, if Idaho is going to have fans at the game, because it is a de facto home court advantage for Idaho if we didn't suck. except we're playing at 8:30 a.m. I think I think structurally that setup Dallas is a bit rough for Idaho.
Yeah, I mean that's not awesome. That's about the worst time you could possibly ask to tip off a game. I know that these guys are college athletes. They're not paid to do this, but a lot of them, they treat this as serious as a job, and they're not, again, I'm not going to say professionals, but like this is what you're training for, to play whenever. I would imagine most of the people listening to this probably went to college in Moscow, Idaho, or have some sort of affiliation, and probably understand how difficult it is to do anything at 8:00 in the morning when you're just a regular college kid just trying to wake up and put pants on and go to class. 8:30 is not a great time for a team, and both teams are going to have to deal with that. 8:30 is that is an awful time. It's the one drawback of the Big Sky Conference tournament is that you play these terrible games at 8:30 on a Wednesday. You're going to have 15 people show up to the arena to watch it, and almost nobody actively following it along at work. Like that's the worst time. You get it in the afternoon, yeah, you can kind of slack off a little bit. 8:30 in the morning is right when people are trying to look productive for the first bit of their day. So it's just not a great scene all around. But if this game goes very poorly, then fantastic. Nobody had to watch it. That's the one drawback I have to this or a non-drawback to this is, hey, if this goes as poorly as we're afraid it's going to, it happened at 8:30 in the morning and nobody had to watch it. One thing I did want to point out that I feel like we missed covering, Brian, you specifically called out William Fitzpatrick as somebody to watch. We alluded to it because I had the box scores up. In that first game where Idaho won in overtime, Fitzpatrick had 0 points. So that's probably not going to happen again. It's another reason why this game's probably going to look closer to the second game than the first game, where Fitzpatrick had 15 points and went 5 or 9 from the field, threw in 7 rebounds as well. Had his worst game of the season against Idaho in the first go-round. Probably not going to see a repeat performance of that.
The caveat being that Zach Chappelle for Sacramento State had his best game of the season the first time we played, scoring 30. So you're correct. I mean, honestly, I don't think we're necessarily going to get either of those repeated. And honestly, Idaho shot 32.7% in the first game. In the most recent game against Sacramento State. I hope we don't have a repeat of something like that, because good God, is it going to be a long early game if that's the case. Before we do our preview or our pick, which I think we've already done the pick more or less, we had questions about the score in the group chat for the women's game. Right now, 2 minutes and change left in the second quarter. Idaho women have a 16-point lead against top 5, aka last place Portland State. So concerns about a faceplant in the first round look to be gone for our women. Obviously, there's a second half, but also Portland State sucks. So the second half comeback, I don't expect to be there. Dallas, 2 things. I don't care about score prediction. Who wins, and is it close?
Sac State wins, obviously, and it depends. What would you define as close?
Sub double digit is our dividing line. Let me rephrase that, not double digits. Let's call 7 points the dividing line, just because, I mean, like, my definition of close is result felt like it was in question for the majority of the game.
Sac State wins. It does not feel like it's particularly close at any point throughout the game. Idaho closes the gap at the end and makes it feel a little closer just by the score, but anybody that watched it, it really wasn't that close. Idaho ends up losing by 6.
I hate that I have to do this, but look, I'm scanning through our last few games. Count Northern Colorado in here as well as a reference point, even though we're not playing. Northern Colorado, we had to shoot 55.6% against Northern Colorado and 48% from 3 to still lose by 4. Idaho has 1 win on the entire season, D1 win. Well, actually 1 win total, because our Bible college games we're at ICCU. Idaho has 1 total win this season away from ICCU. That was against Portland State early in the season. Portland State, they have a new head coach. They also kind of coalesced later in the season. So that was a not as good Portland State team we played early that we picked up the win against. I think if the easiest pick here is, look, Idaho has one total win when we're not in Moscow. We finished with a surprisingly good record relative to being 7-21 against D1 teams on the season. Idaho is 6-7 at home, which, again, shockingly good relative to our overall record. Well, Idaho was 1-12 on the road, 0-2 in neutral court games. That is 1-14 away from ICCU. There is no world where you should pick Idaho to win. Honestly, I think it's probably going to be like a low double-digit game because Idaho has to just shoot so dang well to hang in. And Sacramento State, they're kind of if Idaho could play any defense whatsoever, the style matchup Sacramento State doesn't really matter that much. But we can't. So it does. Sac State's going to win by, I think, about 12. We chose to not preview Montana State because, look, if we get there, I'm fine saying, hey, this is my fault, dudes. We should talk about this. Let's do a quick pregame show for fun if time allows, but I'm not really concerned about it. I think that's good to close out the night. We're an hour, 10 minutes. Dallas, before we call it a day, anything else you want to touch on before we move on?
I do want to point that out. I finally have the bracket up. So again, 8:30 in the morning for our Pacific time folks, 9:30 in the morning on Wednesday for our Mountain Time weirdos. Again, if Idaho somehow happens to beat Sac State, they do play the number 1 team, Montana State. That's Thursday, March 10th. That would be noon for our weirdos in Mountain Time and 11 a.m. for the rest of us.
Meaning there will be no, even if we win, there will be no pregame show.
No, not a chance. There will be a lot of questionable content on Only Tubs. Again, www.patreon.com/Tubs at the Club.
Patrick brings up a point from the chat that it can also be tougher for teams to shoot inside bigger arenas, which explains Idaho shooting sub 33% in Sacramento because the nest. Everyone needs to Google Sacramento State basketball facility or arena. Arena is a joking term that they see like 500 people, but the Boise venue is going to be comparable in size to what ICCU is, but it will be different, and it's a hockey venue, not a basketball venue. So the frame of reference for a shooter is going to be different. But we're going to move on. Fingers crossed that we're wrong. Don't think we will. Fingers crossed that very quickly after Idaho loses in the first round, we have an emergency show to discuss changes coming into the team. We chose to not focus on that because we got a conference tournament coming up, but I will be absolutely not floored if we have an emergency podcast not too long after our season ends, maybe the end of the conference tournament. That is not from intelligence given to us. That's just my understanding. But
and from your eyeballs of what happens on the court. That
correct
too.
Correct. Hey, dude, reference point. Danny Sprinkles in his third year at Montana State. They won the league. So moving on from that point.
Really good doing it.
Yes, they did. Thanks for coming on, everyone. If you're not watching the women's game and you're watching us, jump off, watch the women's game. We're going to let Colby Cuff play us out. Go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
So raise your glass and have a drink with me. Here's to the Vandals in the crowd. All just out there living the dream. Part of one and only Moscow drinking team.